Arturo Toscanini was one of the most celebrated and influential conductors of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Born in Italy in 1867, he first gained fame as a cellist before rising to prominence as a conductor. His career spanned more than 6 decades, during which he led renowned orchestras like La Scala, the New York Philharmonic, and most notably, the NBC Symphony Orchestra. Toscanini's influence continues to resonate in concert halls around the world, but what was it about him that created such a lasting legacy? Darrett Adkins is a concert cellist and professor at the Juilliard School and Oberlin Conservatory of Music. He says Toscanini was known primarily for one unique quality.
He conducted, I believe, mostly or famously anyways, from memory, which means he didn't have the score on the stand in front of him while he conducted. And apparently Toscanini had an ability to bring the score into his mind, into his imagination, into his body, without needing it in front of him, and that he was quite famous for that.
Toscanini had what's called an eidetic memory, which gave him the ability to recall a composition after seeing it only once. Adding to this commitment to accuracy, Toscanini insisted on interpreting compositions exactly as the composer intended. Unlike many of his contemporaries who infused their own style into performances, Toscanini remained faithful to the original score. Yet Toscanini didn't just seek technical perfection, he pushed his orchestra to play with emotion to bring the music to life, while staying true to the composer's vision.
He was particularly noted for that work ethic and for his intense devotion to interpreting the composer's works. What was their intention? How loud is fortissimo? How soft is pianissimo? Which is an interpretation for sure, but he wanted to use the composer's markings as the guide. And he encouraged the musicians, whoever he worked with, even though they had their music in front of them, and he would say, look to the score if you don't know, but play with your hearts.
That's Lucy Antek Johnson, author of This Was Toscanini, The Maestro, My Father, and Me. She co-wrote the book with her late father Samuel Antek, who was first violinist with the NBC Symphony Orchestra under Toscanini. His daughter says that while Toscanini was known for his long, demanding rehearsals and occasional explosive temper, that doesn't fully capture who he was.
He was blessed with a particular energy, no doubt, and health. But I think my interpretation, rereading the material and hearing all the stories throughout the years, was also his absolute devotion to music. And in rehearsal or in a recording session, he could be a very tough taskmaster. But off the stage, in more personal moments, he was actually a very easy to talk to social person who loved to talk about music. Music was truly his life, not just his profession. And it was a calling. And those who worked with him felt the same way about their own work when they worked with him.
And while Toscanini could be very controlling, he made sure to encourage collaboration in the orchestras. Adkins notes that Toscanini encouraged his musicians to listen closely to one another and develop the ability to play without him being there.
The idea of being so interested in orchestral precision, in ensemble, in specific balancing between instruments, the idea that the sound of the orchestra depended on each member of the orchestra hearing their rightful place in the volume and color of every note they played with other musicians. Toscanini apparently was a pioneer, or perhaps the pinnacle of helping the orchestra to listen to each other in that way, to listen, to play chamber music together. It's interesting because it might be a little bit ironic that, or paradoxical perhaps, that somebody who was known for being incredibly controlling in front of the orchestra would have created the atmosphere and the environment for the orchestra players to listen to each other and be able to play without him.
Toscanini was also one of the first conductors to embrace emerging technology like radio and recordings. And at age 70, he became the first musical director of the NBC Symphony Orchestra. In this role, Toscanini and his musicians performed weekly radio broadcast concerts, bringing classical music into the homes of millions and making it more accessible to the general public.
He was a true rock star. He would travel around the world, giving concerts. The lineup for tickets, it would be like going to a rock concert today. That's how dynamic he was. That's how popular he was. That's how much people loved his music.
Clearly, Toscanini was a one-of-a-kind talent, but what was it really like inside his orchestra pit? Johnson's father wrote about his experience playing for Toscanini in his memoirs. Here is Johnson reading as her father.
He looked at us piercingly for the briefest moment, then raised his arms. In one smashing stroke, the baton came down. A vibrant sound suddenly gushed forth from the tense players. With each heart-pounding timpani stroke in the opening bars of Brahms' First Symphony, his baton beat became more powerful, more insistent, his shoulders strained and hunched as though buffeting a giant wind. As we in the violin section tore with our bows against our strings, I felt I was being sucked into a roaring maelstrom of sound. Cantare, sostenere, I was to hear those words often in the years to come. Sing, sustained, Toscanini's battle cry. This was the first time they were flung at us, and for 17 years, we lived by them.
Though he died in 1957, Adkins says Toscanini's legacy can still be felt in the classical world today.
I don't think there's a living orchestral musician who hasn't had some contact with the legacy of Toscanini. Of course, as history moves inexorably forward, we do lose immediate contact. I never met him. I was born after he died. But many of my older colleagues met him, or certainly played with musicians that he conducted, played with musicians that he mentored, played with musicians that were deeply and forever inspired by the kind of work that he did.
While conductors and musicians like Adkins work to keep classical traditions alive, the genre isn't nearly as popular as it was during Toscanini's time. Concert halls and symphony orchestras have faced declining ticket sales, aging audiences, and reduced funding. Though some have taken a page out of Toscanini's book and turned to technology like streaming services, it still isn't what it used to be. Adkins says the classical music community is focusing on education as well as diversity and inclusion. With increased funding, visibility, and outreach, he says we might just discover the next Toscanini.
Passionate people are the best advocates for any art form. The more of them that are out there, the more the art form survives. And as far as I know, very little damage has ever come from somebody studying and being involved in music. And that's an important thing. It's only given joy and given solace and given inspiration and challenged people's minds. And it is the universality of it that really is true. Not everybody hears every piece the same way, but everybody who can hear music and get something from it. And that brings us together. And that's very, very powerful.
To find out more about Darrett Adkins, Lucy Antek Johnson, and all our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on X, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galante. Our lead producer is Libby Foster. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Gary Price.